Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, German Chancellor Angela Merkel stepping down after 16 years in office and only just recently and somewhat belatedly admitting to being a feminist. Our Berlin correspondents take a look at what she's done for women's rights. Also, the dangers of artificial intelligence. I'll be talking to Professor Kate Crawford, a leading international scholar on the subject, whose latest book, Atlas of AI, talks about the planetary costs of the technology. And scoring a goal for equal pay, the US Soccer Federation offers identical contracts to both its male and female players. Now, Angela Merkel may have been Germany's first female chancellor, but her gender is not something she puts forward in a forceful way, either via fashion or policy. The pantsuit-wearing leader having avoided describing herself as a feminist throughout most of her public life until very recently. And her efforts to improve the situation of women have largely been slow in coming, as Nick Spicer reports.
Conservative Chancellor Angela Merkel, called the world's most powerful woman and a model for many others in Germany. In Prenzlauer Berg, a trendy Berlin neighborhood, voters lean left. For these young women who grew up with Merkel leading the country, she nevertheless broke a glass ceiling.
Eine starke Frau, souverän, sie hat ganz schön viel ausgehalten.
Dadurch, dass sie als Frau Kanzlerin ist, auch Frauen gezeigt hat, dass man mehr erreichen kann als Frau.
But has Merkel defended the cause of women? More German women are working, but there's still an 18% pay gap with men overall. It was only in 2020 that she accepted the idea of imposing a quota for company boards in big companies. So a mixed record, according to the Federation of Women Entrepreneurs.
Wir würden uns wünschen, dass allgemein die Repräsentanz von Frauen stärker wird, sowohl in der Politik, in der Gesellschaft, in der Wirtschaft. Und das kann ein großer Zugfaktor sein, aber auch die Rahmenbedingungen. Also ich denke mal, wenn man gerade auf Deutschland und Frankreich schaut, ist das Thema Kinderbetreuung ein ganz großer Faktor. Auch da gibt es durchaus noch Luft nach oben.
The first female chancellor didn't initiate, but rather accompanied major changes in society, says Merkel's biographer. It was only as she was about to leave politics that she actually said she was a feminist.
Ich glaube auch, dass dieser westdeutsche oder auch westeuropäische Salonfeminismus ihr sehr fremd ist. Also so dieses, sie hat immer gesagt, sie wolle sich nicht mit der Feder schmücken, weil sie eben diese Kämpfe und die Diskussionen, die in Westeuropa seit den 60er Jahren stattgefunden haben, nicht nachvollzogen hat und auch nicht miterlebt hat.
In her 16 years in office, Merkel never really put forward her femininity or feminism. But she remains an icon for many women around the world.
To Afghanistan, where the Taliban is now preventing female students from returning to schools. The Taliban argue that it is for their safety until a secure transport system is established. But civil rights activists have pointed out this was the excuse used by the Islamist group the last time they were in power, between 1996 and 2001, when women and girls were banned from education and work for the whole period. Now, many of us may not yet realise it, but we are already using artificial intelligence every day, such as facial or sound recognition software. AI is basically the use of algorithms in computer systems to mimic how humans process information, and the more input it receives, the smarter it gets. But as we've talked about before, when systems are all designed primarily by men, the processes that the computers use to learn and interpret data result in a skewed outcome. Professor Kate Crawford is a leading international scholar of the social and political implications of artificial intelligence. She is a research professor of communication at USC Annenberg and has just written a book entitled Atlas of AI, Power, Politics and the Planetary Costs of Artificial Intelligence. She also happens to be a fellow Australian and joins me now from New York. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Crawford. With the world consumed by the pandemic, how much have we been asleep at the wheel when it comes to the risks associated with artificial intelligence?
Well, certainly we've seen artificial intelligence technologies move ever deeper into so many of our social institutions like education and healthcare and criminal justice. And while artificial intelligence can sound very futuristic and extremely smart and intelligent, in many cases it's actually very pragmatic and in some cases making very serious errors, which is why in Atlas of AI I suggest that artificial intelligence is actually neither artificial nor intelligent. It is in fact made by people with lots of hidden labor throughout the supply chain and of course enormous amounts of our data. So similarly, when we tend to think of it as a highly intelligent technology, I think we have to be far more critical about the ways in which AI does not necessarily make intelligent decisions.
Now, I've mentioned that gender bias is an issue when it comes to AI. What are the implications for women?
Well, there are so many. I mean, let me just share some of the recent examples in the last couple of years. We've seen voice recognition systems fail to recognize female-sounding voices. We've had facial detection systems that do not recognize women of color. We've had Facebook and Google showing high-paid ads to men and not to women. And even Apple's credit card was shown to be offering 20 times more credit to men, even though the research shows that women are better credit risks on average. And of course, we had a spectacular example from Amazon, where their own AI system, which is used for hiring, this is an automated system that assesses resumes, was actually downvoting all women applicants. And of course, there are many reasons for why these things are happening. In the case of the Amazon resume system, of course, it was trained on the data about existing engineering employees, who are around 85% men, depending how you count. So in many ways, these errors keep occurring because of the ways in which we harvest data from the past in order to inform the systems that will determine our future.
Now, recently, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, called for a moratorium on the sale and use of artificial intelligence systems that threaten human rights until adequate safeguards are in place to ensure the technology is not going to be abused. Do you think a moratorium can indeed be implemented?
Well, I certainly think this was an extremely powerful statement by Michelle Bachelet. And of course, it comes on the back of a major UN report looking at the concerns around human rights being impacted by artificial intelligence technologies. But in terms of what a moratorium would look like, it is certainly possible, but we have to think about the way it gets applied. At the moment, it's been suggested for specific kinds of technologies, such as spyware and things such as facial recognition. But of course, there are many ways that AI is being used in the back end of systems that we do not see. So moratoriums can really only affect the systems that we know about, that are sort of quite large and spectacular in our lives. But in actual fact, I would suggest that the infrastructures behind artificial intelligence extend far more deeply than most people realize. So moratoriums can only be partially successful.
Now, you've written that we need to focus less on the ethics of AI and more on power, but surely the two are entwined.
Absolutely right. And what I mean in the book by saying this is certainly the use of ethics statements. Now, we've seen hundreds of ethics principle guidelines and statements released in just the last couple of years from companies, from NGOs, and from large organizations. But what we lack is a way to make those ethical guidelines have force, to have real accountability in the world. And that's why I suggest we need to look at this issue of power, the ways in which AI systems are actually widening asymmetries of power, and particularly in terms of who benefits the most from these systems and who is most likely to be harmed, which, as we see time and time again, tends to be those communities who are already marginalized or socially disadvantaged.
Is there a note of optimism with any of this?
There certainly is, Annette, and in some ways there are many exciting potential benefits of artificial intelligence. For example, we've seen some extraordinary algorithmic techniques for analyzing and predicting protein folding structures. We use artificial intelligence certainly in the pursuit of understanding and preventing climate change. It's critical for things like planetary sensing, also in astronomy. But it's when these systems get applied to our social institutions with the data from the past that contains so many of these structural biases and inequalities that we see these problems emerge. So I think the question that we have to ask always with AI is, the benefits are coming, but at what cost? And this is where I think we really need to look at the much wider view of how AI is being made. Everything from its impacts on the environment, its impacts on labor, and its impacts on our data and privacy across the board.
Professor Crawford, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Annette.
And finally, some good news on the equal pay front and the culmination of a long struggle spearheaded by American football star Megan Rapinoe. The US Soccer Federation having announced it will pay female players the same as men. But in the rest of the football world, there's still a long way to go to reach pay parity, as Emerald Maxwell reports.
The winner is the women's national soccer team!
They've reached celebrity status, invited to red carpet events and on TV shows. The US female football team has been on peak form in recent years. But despite their popularity and back-to-back wins on the field, until now, its players were still paid less than their male counterparts.
Win 4 World Cup championships and 4 Olympic gold medals for the United States. Despite all the wins, I'm still paid less than men who do the same job that I do.
Captain Megan Rapinoe's vocal calls for equal pay have finally paid off. This week, the US Soccer Federation decided to offer players the same contracts regardless of their gender. It follows similar moves in Brazil, England, Ireland and Norway. But in France, the debate continues. The French Federation prefers to pay footballers according to the revenue they bring in. For the men's 2018 World Cup win, it distributed a bonus of €400,000 to each player. Their female counterparts would have pocketed €40,000 if they'd come out top in 2019.
The more the public watches men and women's football with equal enthusiasm, the more sponsors will be drawn to women's as well as men's football, and the broadcasters will follow suit. Then the prize money would be comparable.
Critics of this system point out that female football may be less popular as it's had less time to develop a following. In France, the Vichy regime banned women from the pitch, and it wasn't until 1970 that the French Football Federation officially let women take part in the beautiful game.
And that's it for now. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. So until our next show, bye for now.